because we're about to dive deep, and I mean really deep this time. This isn't just skimming the surface. We're talking a full-on plunge into an idea that's had people thinking for ages. We're jumping into a chapter from a book, and it makes a bold statement. There's way more to you than meets the eye, way more. Think life beyond the physical body. Get this. What if our bodies are more like outfits for our souls in this lifetime? Wild, right?
It is a pretty radical idea.
Totally. The source jumps right in saying we aren't these bodies but spiritual beings, souls, just hanging out in these, well, fleshy vessels for a bit. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the idea of self-realization is what's really fascinating here. It's not just a casual, oh yeah, I believe in souls. It's about truly grasping that your core, your being, is separate from your physical form. Think of it like this. Your soul is the consciousness, the energy, the you-ness that makes this body come alive.
Right, it's like that saying, you're not a drop in the ocean, you're the entire ocean in a drop, except it's like, well, you. And to show how much our focus on the physical world might be messing with how we see things, the source talks about this man who's delirious. Imagine someone delirious, mind-clouded, their grip on reality's gone, their experience of happiness, it's all messed up, isn't it?
It is, and it's a powerful way to show how connecting only with our physical selves can really distort how we see true happiness. Speaking of happiness, the source goes into how different schools of thought look at freedom from suffering.
Okay. I'm interested.
Buddhism, with nirvana, focuses on detaching from desire and breaking free from this cycle of birth and death. But the Bhagavad Gita, it takes a different approach. It's not about ditching all action, but performing actions with a higher consciousness.
So less about becoming a hermit and more about being mindful in everyday life.
Exactly. It's about understanding you're a soul and acting from that knowledge instead of being controlled by fleeting desires.
That makes sense. And the source really dives into the big questions about consciousness. They say, nope, consciousness isn't just a product of, well, stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just your brain firing off chemicals and suddenly you're aware. They use this simple example. Think about a child's understanding of death. A body without consciousness is just a body, right? No actions, no feelings, no experiences.
Right. It makes you wonder, if consciousness was just material, why can't we revive a dead body? We'd have all the physical parts, but we can't seem to spark that consciousness back up.
It's like trying to bake a cake without turning on the oven. You've got the ingredients, but you need that heat, that energy to transform it all.
Yes, exactly. And this connects to another point the source makes. Just because we can't physically see the soul doesn't mean it's not there.
It's like air or radio waves. We can't see them, but we experience their effects.
I like that example.
We feel the wind, we hear music through speakers. Just because something's invisible doesn't mean it's not real. Makes you think, what else are we missing, right?
It does. It really does. And the Bhagavad Gita says this limited perception, this clinging to what our senses tell us, that's a big reason we suffer. We're so busy identifying with this temporary physical form that we miss the bigger picture.
The real us.
Yes.
Exactly.
You know, it reminds me of how our experience of water changes. Summertime, we crave it, love jumping in a pool. But winter, we avoid it like crazy because it's freezing.
That's a great way to put it. It shows how our senses color everything. The water's the same, but how we experience it changes based on other stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what the source is getting at. True happiness, the kind that doesn't depend on the weather or anything external, that comes from understanding our spiritual nature, which is inherently joyful.
Okay, so that's our true nature. But why does it feel so hard to grasp sometimes? What about all our other desires? Love, knowledge, a purpose. Where do those fit in?
That is the big question, isn't it? And the source talks about how our souls are naturally drawn to certain things. Happiness, knowledge, even eternity. It's like these longings are built into us. Like clues, hints at something bigger. I am hooked. Tell me more.
They are like clues. The source even connects those desires to the nature of what they call the supreme being. It's like our longing for those qualities. It reflects a deeper connection to something way bigger than us.
Okay, now that's something to think about. So we're not just talking about seeking pleasure or avoiding pain. It's about tapping into something deeper, more essential to who we really are.
You've got it. And to explain this connection, the source uses this beautiful analogy of a drop of ocean water. It might be tiny, but that single drop, it holds the essence of the entire ocean.
I love that. So even though we feel like individual souls, maybe we're all connected to something much bigger, something infinite, like we carry a piece of the universe within us.
Powerful image, right? Makes you think about the potential we all have. The source even says the amazing things humans have done, art, music, discoveries, those are glimpses into the vast capabilities of the soul.
But if our souls are capable of so much, why does it feel like we get stuck? Why do we get caught up in the daily grind, the anxieties, the constant wanting?
That is the question, isn't it? And the source acknowledges that struggle, that we're bombarded by our senses, drawn to pleasure and distractions. Imagine a tiny boat in a stormy sea being tossed around. That's our mind, constantly pulled by desire, fear, doubt.
So how do we navigate those stormy seas? How do we become the captain of our own ship, so to speak?
That's where this idea of a Goswami comes in, which means master of the senses. It's not about ignoring our senses, but learning to control them, finding that balance and peace in the middle of chaos.
So less about suppressing desires and more about understanding them, even using them in a positive way.
Exactly. The source emphasizes that the enjoyment we get from material stuff, chasing the next thrill, it's fleeting, superficial, like scratching an itch, feels good for a second, but then you need to scratch again and again.
And that cycle never truly satisfies, does it? It's like drinking salt water.
Yeah.
Might quench your thirst for a moment, but ultimately leaves you thirstier.
You got it. And the source compares this to the lasting happiness of the soul. A happiness that comes from connecting with something beyond ourselves, something eternal and unchanging.
Okay, so where do things like the Vedas, the Bible, the Quran, those books of knowledge, where do they come in?
Good question. The source says they all have a similar purpose: to guide us, to help us break free from our limited views and reconnect with our true spiritual nature.
So it's not about getting lost in strict interpretations, but about finding the deeper wisdom, the universal truths.
Exactly. Think of it like a map. Different maps, different routes, different landmarks, but the same goal: to help you navigate and reach your destination.
It's about finding those common threads, that message of self-discovery. I like that.
The source uses a really interesting analogy to explain how these teachings can help us grow. They compare it to the rules of a society. Now, we might not always love rules, right? But there's a reason for them.
To keep things in order, prevent chaos.
Precisely. Without rules, without structure, without ethical guidelines, society crumbles. Similarly, moral and spiritual principles give us a framework to evolve, to go beyond our impulses, to connect with our higher selves.
Those principles are like guardrails, keeping us on track, reminding us of our potential even when we get distracted.
Exactly. And this leads to a point the source makes about different kinds of enjoyment. They say there's a difference between the fleeting enjoyment from material things and the eternal, soul-satisfying enjoyment, the kind of enjoyment you experience when you connect with something higher.
So they're saying there's a whole other level of happiness out there beyond what we can imagine.
Yes, and to explain this idea of enjoyer and enjoyed, they use the example of a husband and wife.
Right, I remember that part. It's not about one person having more enjoyment than the other, is it?
Exactly. It's about realizing that true joy, the kind that goes beyond our individual experience, comes from recognizing we're interconnected. It comes from being part of something bigger than ourselves. It's about understanding that true fulfillment isn't about taking, but about sharing, experiencing the joy of connection and unity.
It's like they're saying true happiness isn't about chasing individual pleasure, but realizing we're all connected, part of something much bigger.
Yes, exactly. And this connects to how the source sees the material body. They say it's temporary, it decays, and ultimately it's not the real us.
So it's like we're not really these bodies, but something more lasting. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is a shift in perspective, for sure. They even compare the body to clothes we wear for a while, and then, well, we get rid of them.
And the soul. What about the soul, according to the source?
This is where it gets really interesting. They say the soul is this indestructible essence that lives in the body for a bit, then moves on. They even use the image of a warrior in battle. The body might be slain, but the soul remains unharmed.
Wow, that's a powerful image. Makes you think about death differently, not as the end, but as a transition, a journey for the soul. Have you ever felt that way? Like maybe this physical life isn't the whole story?
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of this source. It doesn't just throw these big concepts at you. It gives you practical ways to connect with this deeper reality.
That's right. They mentioned chanting as ways to move beyond our physical limits and tap into that eternal joy inside. Tell us more about those.
Sure. This is about dedicating your life to something bigger than yourself, recognizing we're all part of this grand scheme. And chanting, it's not just singing words, it's using sound and vibration to actually shift our consciousness, connect with a higher frequency.
Like tuning a radio, finding the right station to experience something totally new.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes these practices aren't about running away from reality, but experiencing it more fully, more authentically. It's about living with awareness, connected to our true nature.
Wow, this deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. It's like we've been looking at life through this tiny peephole, and this chapter just threw open the window, showing us how vast everything really is.
That's a great way to put it. It's about expanding our perspective, questioning what we think we know, and being open to a whole new way of being in the world.
It's definitely been a workout for my mind in the best way possible. I'm feeling energized, inspired, and maybe a little more connected to, well, everything.
That's what we want. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one last thought. If our souls are capable of so much more than we realize, if we all have this huge potential for knowledge, joy, connection, what could we achieve if we tapped into that power? How would our lives change? What could we create? What could we become?
Now, those are questions worth exploring. This deep dive has been quite the journey, and it feels like it's just the beginning. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep asking those big questions, keep seeking, and keep diving deep.